The morning started quietly, like every other. Claire Thompson sat at the edge of her bed, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Her husband Michael had left early for work as usual, same gray suit, same briefcase, same silence. They had been married for 15 years, and though their house still felt full, the warmth between them had slowly thinned, like sunlight fading through fog. Claire didn't remember when things had changed. Maybe after Michael's promotion, when he started working late and answering calls during dinner. Maybe when their daughter moved out for college, leaving the house too quiet, the rooms too still. Or maybe it was Claire herself, lost somewhere between the woman she used to be and the one staring back in the mirror now. That afternoon, she walked across the small suburban neighborhood in Seattle where they lived. The air smelled of rain and pine. She paused at the mailbox, then at the sound of a familiar voice calling her name. "Claire, you forgot your umbrella again," a warm voice said. It was Ethan Parker, their neighbor who lived 2 houses down. He was younger than her by nearly 10 years, a freelance architect who worked from home. Claire smiled, though it was a faint, uncertain smile. "Seems I always do," she said. Ethan walked toward her, holding out her forgotten umbrella with that boyish grin that always carried an easy kind of kindness. "Can't let you melt in the rain," he joked. That line, light and harmless, made her laugh for the first time in weeks. Over the next few days, their conversations became routine. Small talk by the fence, a wave from across the driveway, then longer chats about books, music, and life, things she hadn't talked about in years. Ethan had that rare way of listening, like he was actually hearing her. It wasn't love, not yet. It was attention. And for a woman who had spent years feeling invisible in her own home, attention felt like sunlight on frozen ground. One evening, as the rain beat softly against the windows, Michael called to say he'd be staying late at the office again. Claire didn't even question it anymore. She just hung up, looked around the empty house, and felt the weight of silence pressing against her. That's when her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Storm's pretty bad. You okay over there?" She stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Yeah, just quiet, that's all." A moment later, another message came through. "You want some company? I just made coffee." Claire hesitated. She looked at the clock, 8:12 p.m. The rain was heavy now, wind whispering through the trees outside. She told herself it was just coffee. Just 2 neighbors keeping each other company while the storm passed. When she stepped into Ethan's house, the warmth hit her immediately. The smell of roasted coffee beans, soft jazz playing in the background, the glow of a single lamp near the couch. It felt lived in, not perfect, but alive. Ethan smiled as she entered. "Glad you made it. Didn't want you sitting alone all evening. I talked for hours. About work, about growing up, about dreams that had somehow gotten smaller with time." She told him about her painting hobby, about how she used to paint sunsets before life got busy. He told her about his travels, the places he wanted to see again someday, at some point. Claire realized how close they were sitting. Their shoulders almost touched. The moment was quiet, not charged, not inappropriate, just as still. Breathless awareness that something inside her was changing. She stood up suddenly, her heart beating faster than she expected. "I should probably get going," she said softly. Ethan nodded but didn't move. His eyes met hers, not demanding, not pulling, just there, steady, gentle. "You're always welcome here, Claire. I mean that." She smiled, though her throat felt tight. "Thank you," she whispered before stepping into the rain again. Back home, she leaned against the door and closed her eyes. She didn't know what she was feeling. Guilt, maybe, but also a strange sense of being seen again. For years, she had been the woman who made dinners, paid bills, listened to updates about meetings she didn't understand. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, she had talked about herself. The next day, everything felt different. When Michael came home, he seemed distant again, distracted by something on his phone. She wanted to tell him about her evening, about how much she missed their old conversations, but the words stuck in her throat. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, mumbled something about a late project, and disappeared into his study. Claire sat at the dinner table alone, staring at the untouched food. Days turned into weeks. Her quiet friendship with Ethan deepened. They would meet for coffee, share stories, laugh about trivial things. Nothing physical ever happened, but the emotional pull was undeniable. Every time she saw him, she felt both alive and ashamed. One afternoon, while walking home, she found Ethan waiting by his porch, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" she asked. He smiled. "Something for you. You said you used to paint." Inside was a new set of paints and brushes. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had remembered that about her, not even Michael. "I thought maybe you'd like to start again," Ethan said simply. Claire felt tears burn at the corners of her eyes. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," he interrupted softly. That night, she sat in her small home studio, a corner room she hadn't entered in years, and started painting again. Colors flowed across the canvas like she had never stopped. And all the while, she thought of Ethan's quiet smile, his words. The way he made her feel understood. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. There was no denying it. But part of her couldn't pull back anymore. Then, one evening, everything began to shift. Michael came home early. That alone was unusual. He placed his keys on the table and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not suspicion, but curiosity. "You've been smiling more lately," he said quietly. She froze. "Have I?" "Yeah," he said. "It's nice. I just hope, whatever's making you happy, it's not something I should worry about." Claire's breath caught. He wasn't accusing her, but something in his tone told her he felt the distance between them. That night, as she lay awake, her mind raced. She didn't know what hurt more, her longing for Ethan or the guilt she felt toward Michael, who had once been the love of her life. The next day, when she saw Ethan again, something unspoken passed between them. A knowing glance that carried both warmth and warning. "Maybe we should take a break," she whispered. He looked at her with understanding. "If that's what you need." But even as she said the words, she knew her heart was already tangled in something deeper than friendship. And she had no idea that soon everything she had been hiding would come crashing into the open. The following week felt unusually heavy for Claire. The house seemed colder, the days longer, and every sound echoed in the stillness. She had promised herself she would stay away from Ethan, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, and she could feel her conscience tugging at her heart. Michael, however, barely noticed the change. He was buried in his work again, his evenings spent answering calls or typing late into the night. Claire tried to bridge the gap to start small conversations, but his distracted replies made a retreat further into silence. They had become polite strangers living under the same roof, pretending that routine meant closeness. One rainy afternoon, while rearranging the bookshelf, Claire found an old photo album. The pictures showed her and Michael on their honeymoon, laughing, sunburned, happy. She traced the edge of the photo with her fingers and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. They used to have everything: laughter, hope, dreams. Somewhere along the years, they had simply stopped seeing each other. That evening, as she sat by the window, her phone buzzed again. "How are you holding up?" Her heart tightened. She had deleted their previous chats, hoping to start fresh. But his message pulled her right back into the comfort she had been missing. She typed, then erased her words several times before replying. "I'm fine. Just thinking too much, I guess." A minute later, his reply came. "I miss our talks. They made my days better." Claire stared at the screen. It was simple, harmless even, but the honesty in his words pierced through her. She hadn't heard anyone say something like that to her in years. Without meaning to, she found herself typing back, "Me too." The next morning, she saw him in his yard fixing a loose fence post. She wanted to walk by without stopping, but he looked up and smiled, and something inside her melted. "Morning," he said. "Looks like the rain finally gave us a break." "Yeah," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. There was a pause, not awkward, but full of unspoken words. Then he said quietly, I'm sorry if I made things complicated. That wasn't what I wanted. Claire shook her head. You didn't. I needed to remember who I was again. You helped me do that. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it wasn't all wrong. This was the kind of conversation that lingers, gentle, unfinished. And even though she turned to walk away, she could still feel his eyes on her, kind but full of something deeper. Over the next few days, Claire tried to focus on her life. She started painting again, joined a local art group, and even began cooking new recipes she hadn't tried in years. Michael noticed the small changes, though he didn't know what to make of them. You seem different lately, he said one evening as they sat at dinner. Claire looked up from her plate. Different how? He hesitated, then smiled slightly. Happier, lighter. She wanted to tell him that she had found pieces of herself again, that it wasn't another person giving her happiness, but the courage to rediscover her own life. But she stayed quiet. I guess I'm just trying to do things I love again, she said softly. Michael nodded. That's good. I'm glad. But deep down, Claire could sense something else in his tone. Suspicion, perhaps, or curiosity. It wasn't anger, but it was awareness. He could feel that something had shifted, even if he couldn't name it. One afternoon, Michael came home earlier than usual. He looked around the house, as if noticing for the first time that things had changed. The smell of fresh paint from her art room. The quiet hum of soft music playing from the kitchen. The way Claire moved around with an energy he hadn't seen in years. Who have you been spending time with? He asked casually, though his voice carried a weight that made Claire pause. She turned, surprised. What do you mean? I just mean, you seem to have someone inspiring you again. I don't know if that's good or bad, he said. Claire swallowed hard. I joined a painting group. Maybe that's it. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told her he didn't believe her completely. That night, she couldn't sleep. The guilt began to grow heavier, even if nothing physical had happened. She knew her heart had crossed boundaries she couldn't deny. The next day, she decided to go for a walk to clear her mind. As she passed Ethan's house, she saw him sitting on his porch, sketching something in a notebook. He looked up and smiled, but this time, she didn't return it right away. Ethan, she said quietly, stepping closer. I think we need to stop talking for a while. It's getting too hard. He nodded slowly, though she could see the disappointment in his face. If that's what you need, he said gently. But Claire, I care about you. I hope you know that. I do, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But I can't keep living between two worlds. It's not fair to anyone. She turned to leave, and he didn't stop her. But she could feel his gaze on her back until she disappeared down the street. That evening, Michael came home later than usual. His tie was loose and his eyes looked tired. Tough day, she asked. Always. He sighed, then looked at her intently. Can we talk? Her heart sank. Of course. He hesitated, then said, I know something's been going on, Claire. I don't know what it is exactly, but I feel it. You're distant, distracted. And when you smile, it's not because of me. The words hit her like cold water. Michael, he raised a hand gently. I'm not angry. I just want the truth. Is there someone else? The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to lie to protect him from the truth and herself from the guilt. But something inside her refused to keep pretending. There's no affair, she said quietly. But yes, there's someone who made me feel seen again. Nothing happened between us, but it made me realize how lonely I've been. Michael didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, staring at the table, his hands clenched together. I thought we were just comfortable, he said finally. I didn't know comfort could turn into distance. Claire felt tears filling her eyes. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know, he said softly, but it did. That night, they didn't sleep in the same bed. Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just broken something that could never be fixed. The next morning, she found Michael in the kitchen, already dressed for work. He looked calm but unreadable. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. But we need to figure out what we're doing. We can't keep living like this. She nodded. I agree. He gave her a long look, then added, maybe you should invite him over. Her eyes widened. What? I don't want secrets, he said. If there's anything left to say, let's get it out in the open. I think I deserve that much. Claire didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she poured herself a cup of coffee. She wasn't sure if she was terrified or relieved. Later that afternoon, she stood by the window staring at Ethan's house across the street. Her heart pounded as she thought about what Michael had said. Was this a trap? A test? Or maybe, just maybe, it was his way of confronting the truth without anger. By evening, she made a decision. She would face it. All of it. She walked across the street, knocked on Ethan's door, and when he opened it, she said quietly, we need to talk. All three of us. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Claire, what's going on? Michael knows, she said simply, and he wants to talk. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, if that's what you want. As she turned back toward her house, her heart raced with a mix of dread and strange relief. She didn't know what would happen next, forgiveness, heartbreak, or something in between, but she knew one thing for sure. The truth could no longer stay hidden, and tomorrow night, everything would come out one way or another. The evening arrived faster than Claire expected. The clock seemed louder than usual, ticking through every anxious breath she took. The sun had already slipped behind the rooftops, leaving the sky dim and heavy. Her heart pounded as she arranged 3 cups on the dining table. Unsure if this was a meeting, a confession, or the beginning of something she could never undo. Michael sat silently on the couch, his hands clasped, his eyes distant. He wasn't angry, at least not in the way she feared. But there was something unreadable in his face, a calm born out of deep exhaustion. He had been thinking for days, weighing love against truth, trust against reality. When the doorbell rang, the sound seemed to echo through the entire house. Claire froze for a moment before forcing herself to move. She opened the door, and there stood Ethan, uncertain, nervous, yet still carrying that quiet steadiness that had once made her feel safe. Come in, she said softly. He nodded, stepping into the living room where Michael stood to greet him. For a brief moment, the two men just looked at each other, not with hostility, but with quiet understanding. They both loved the same woman in different ways, and neither wanted to cause pain. Michael gestured toward the chairs. Let's talk, he said simply. The three of them sat in silence for a few seconds. The room felt too still, like the air itself was waiting. Finally, Michael spoke. I know about the messages, he began. And the time you've spent together, I've seen it in her eyes. The way she looks alive again. Claire's breath caught. But he didn't look at her, he continued. I want the truth. Not to punish anyone, but because I can't fix something I don't understand. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Michael, nothing happened that you should feel betrayed by. We talked, we shared moments, but it never crossed a line. Michael's expression didn't change. But you care for her. Ethan nodded. Yes, I do. The honesty hung heavy in the room. Claire's heart ached, hearing it spoken aloud. She looked down, unable to meet either of their eyes. Michael sighed deeply. I guess I should have seen it coming. I've been absent for too long, too focused on work, too blind to what was happening right in front of me. Claire finally spoke, her voice trembling. It wasn't about replacing you, Michael. It was about feeling seen again. I didn't plan any of this. I just got lost somewhere between who I was and who I became. Michael looked at her, then really looked at her. And do you still love me, Claire? The question cut through her like a blade. She hesitated, then whispered, yes, but I don't know if love is enough when it feels so distant. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between them. Maybe I shouldn't have come. This isn't about me. But Michael shook his head. No, you should hear this too. Because whatever happens, this started with all of us. My absence, her loneliness, your timing. There was no anger in his tone, just quiet resignation. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe this isn't just about blame. Maybe it's about what comes next. Do we keep pretending everything's fine? Or do we start over, honestly?" Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "What do you mean?" He paused, then said softly, "I mean, if you want to go, I won't stop you. But if you want to stay, we rebuild from the truth, not from guilt." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than any confrontation could have. He wasn't trying to trap her. He was giving her freedom. Ethan spoke quietly. "Claire, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted you to feel alive again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You did," she whispered. "But now I have to figure out who I want to be when the noise quiets down." Michael stood and walked to the window, staring into the night. "We used to dream about building a life together," he said softly. "Then somewhere along the way, we started just maintaining one. Maybe we forgot that love needs tending." His voice trembled slightly, and for the first time in years, Claire saw the man she had fallen in love with, not the tired husband, not the distant partner, but the man who had once made her laugh under starlit skies. She walked over, standing beside him. "I don't want to lose what we had," she said, "but I can't go back to pretending everything's fine. If we stay, we have to really talk, really listen." Michael turned to her. "Then let's start now." Ethan stood up slowly. "I think that's my cue to leave." Claire looked at him, torn between gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be seen," she said softly. He smiled gently. "And thank you for reminding me what real love looks like, even when it's messy." Michael extended his hand toward Ethan, surprising them both. "No hard feelings," he said quietly. Ethan took it, his expression sincere. "None at all." When the door closed behind him, silence filled the house once again. Claire and Michael stood there, uncertain, but together. The tension had eased, replaced by something fragile. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. They sat on the couch, side by side, neither speaking for a long time. Finally, Michael said, "I don't think we can fix this overnight." "No," Claire replied softly. "But maybe we can start by remembering why we mattered to each other in the first place." He nodded. "You know, I used to love how you'd wait for me to come home, even if it was late. You'd fall asleep on the couch just to say goodnight." She smiled faintly. "I stopped because I thought you didn't notice anymore." "I noticed," he said quietly. "I just forgot to say it." The night deepened outside, and though neither of them said the words, a quiet peace began to settle between them. They talked about small things, old memories, their son, their dreams they had shelved. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel cold. Days turned into weeks. They started going for evening walks together again, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They didn't avoid the hard conversations either about loneliness, fear, and what nearly broke them apart. Ethan moved away a few months later, taking a new job in another city. Before leaving, he sent Claire a simple note. "Sometimes we meet people not to stay with them, but to wake up something inside us. Thank you for being that for me." Claire read it with a bittersweet smile. She didn't reply, but she folded the note and placed it inside her art journal, not as a secret, but as a reminder. One quiet Sunday morning, months after that night, Claire stood in the kitchen, humming as she made coffee. Michael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, leaning back against him. He kissed the top of her head. "You know, I think we're getting better at this." She laughed softly. "At what?" "At finding each other again." Claire turned around and looked into his eyes. "We're trying," she said, "and maybe that's enough." Outside, the sun streamed through the window, filling the room with soft light. The house that once felt heavy now seemed alive again. Not perfect, but real. They had faced the truth, endured the storm, and somehow, in the middle of all that pain, found a way to start over. As they sat together at the table, sipping coffee and watching the morning unfold, Claire realized something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from forgiving herself, her husband, and even the man who had reminded her what her heart could still feel. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect. Sometimes it breaks you open so you can see what really matters. For Claire, that night had changed everything. Not because it ended something, but because it began again in a way that was honest, fragile, and beautifully human. And as she looked at Michael across the table, smiling through the quiet, she knew one truth above all: love doesn't always survive by staying perfect. It survives when two people decide again and again to stay.